There's a reason Appalachia feels different the moment you enter it. Not just visually, but emotionally. And once you understand why, you'll never look at these mountains the same way again. We'll begin with a few overlooked facts that reveal how this region actually works, before moving through the most compelling places that define Appalachia from south to north. And much later in the video, one quiet detail will explain why Appalachia doesn't just shape the land, it shapes the people who stay. What we now call Appalachia isn't just a mountain range. It's one of the oldest exposed landscapes on Earth. These mountains began forming more than 480 million years ago, long before trees covered the land. To put that in perspective, the Himalayas are barely 50 million years old. The Alps are even younger. Appalachia had time to rise, erode, collapse, and rise again multiple times. That's why the mountains here don't look sharp or dramatic. They're broad, rounded, and quiet. But that quiet hides an extreme past. At their peak, these mountains were likely as tall as 8,000 meters, nearly 26,000 feet, comparable to today's tallest ranges. What we see now is only what erosion couldn't erase. The rest was ground down grain by grain over hundreds of millions of years. That immense age created something rare, stability, and stability allowed life to diversify. Appalachia is one of the most biologically diverse temperate regions on the planet. Within a corridor roughly 2,400 kilometers long, about 1,500 miles, there are more tree species than in all of Europe. Some valleys contain dozens of microclimates packed into a few square kilometers. A short hike of 1 kilometer, not even 0.7 miles, can feel like moving between entirely different ecosystems. This diversity shaped how people lived here and how long they stayed. Farming was never easy. The soil is thin and rocky. Slopes are steep. Floods are sudden. And for most of history, travel was slow. A distance of 30 kilometers, roughly 20 miles, could take an entire day to cross. Communities grew inward instead of outward. Skills were passed down by memory, not by books. Families relied on themselves. Isolation preserved things the rest of the country lost. Some Appalachian dialects still carry sentence structures rooted in Old English, Scottish Gaelic, and early Irish speech. Certain words and expressions disappeared elsewhere centuries ago, but survived here simply because change arrived slowly. Language evolved at the same pace as the land. Beneath all of this lies another layer: coal. Deep underground are some of the largest coal deposits in North America. When extraction began at scale, entire towns formed around a single resource. It brought jobs, railroads, and outside money. But it also created dependence. When the mines closed, many communities were left without an alternative. And still, many people stayed. That decision is often misunderstood. Why remain in a region that's physically demanding, economically fragile, and frequently overlooked? Part of the answer lies in how the landscape feels. Appalachia isn't open or expansive like the plains. It's enclosed, protective. Valleys fold inward. Ridges block sightlines. The land encourages people to stay close, to family, to place, to routine. Studies on migration show that people born in mountainous regions tend to move less frequently than those from flatter terrain, not because they lack opportunity, but because their attachment to place is deeper and more personal. It's not just where they live, it's who they are. And yet, Appalachia has never been truly isolated. Long before roads existed, movement followed the land. Along ridges, through gaps, beside rivers. Some of the paths people walk today trace routes used for thousands of years, first by animals, then by indigenous groups, and later by settlers moving inland. What looks like recreation now was once survival. This is where the pattern starts to emerge. The geology shaped the land shaped movement, movement shaped culture, and culture shaped who stayed. None of these layers exist on their own. They overlap, reinforce, and repeat. And when you finally see how those forces connect, Appalachia stops feeling like a forgotten corner of the map. It starts feeling intentional. Designed by time rather than speed. That's why the most revealing parts of this region aren't found in statistics or borders. They're found in the places where these forces become visible, where age, isolation, movement, and human choice intersect. And that's where we're going next. Most people think the Smoky name comes from mist alone. That's only half the story. The haze that drifts through these valleys is partly natural fog, but it's also created by living forests. Trees release organic compounds that react with sunlight, forming a blue-gray veil that settles between the ridges. It's a visible sign of density, age, and biological activity, not weather. This park protects one of the largest remaining blocks of old-growth forest in eastern North America. Some trees here were already standing before Europeans arrived. More than 19,000 documented species live inside the park, with scientists estimating tens of thousands more still unrecorded. That's not normal for a temperate mountain range. The reason lies in geography. These mountains acted as a refuge during the last ice age. While glaciers reshaped the northern continents, life here endured, adapted, and multiplied. Elevation changes of over 1,500 meters, about 5,000 feet, create stacked climate zones, allowing species from Canada and the Deep South to coexist within a short drive. But the Smokies also hold traces of human persistence. Scattered cabins, churches, and stone walls mark communities that once lived entirely from this land. When the park was created, families were relocated, yet their imprint remains. And as the ridgelines stretch onward, one continuous road begins to trace the spine of the mountains, revealing how people learn to move with this terrain rather than through it. The Blue Ridge Parkway wasn't built to connect cities. It was built to follow the mountains themselves. Stretching nearly 755 kilometers, about 469 miles, this road traces the natural ridgelines instead of cutting through valleys. Engineers avoided straight lines, steep grades, and high speeds. Curves follow contours. Overlooks appear where the land naturally opens. The result is a road that reveals the structure of Appalachia rather than overriding it. As elevation changes, forests shift. Oak and hickory fade into spruce and fir. In less than an hour, you pass through climate zones that would normally require traveling hundreds of kilometers north. This vertical layering explains why biodiversity here remains unusually dense. The Parkway was constructed during the Great Depression, providing work while preserving scenery. Stone bridges and tunnels weren't decorative. They reduced erosion and maintained continuity across fragile slopes. But the road does more than reveal nature. It also links a series of high-elevation communities, places that learn to survive not by extracting resources, but by adapting to life above the valleys. One of those communities sits where the road begins to slow people down enough to stay. Boone developed because permanence mattered more than convenience. At roughly 1,000 meters, about 3,300 feet, this is one of the highest towns of its size in the eastern United States. The growing season is short. Winters linger. Historically, farming alone wasn't enough to sustain long-term growth. The turning point came with education. Appalachian State University shifted the local economy from survival to continuity. Instead of depending on logging or mining, the town invested in knowledge, research, and regional culture. That choice allowed Boone to grow without abandoning its identity. Historically, this area sat along mountain crossing routes used by traders and settlers. Movement never stopped. It simply evolved. Today, ideas, music, and regional traditions move outward through classrooms, festivals, and local businesses rather than wagons and trails. But Boone also marks a geographic transition. Beyond the town, the land changes character. Valleys narrow, slopes steepen. The terrain becomes less accommodating and more exposed. Not far from here, the Appalachian landscape opens abruptly, revealing a break so deep that it interrupts the entire mountain system. Linville Gorge exists because erosion failed to erase it. Here, the Linville River cuts through rock strong enough to resist hundreds of millions of years of weathering. The result is a gorge more than 600 meters deep, nearly 2,000 feet, exposing some of the oldest visible layers in the region. Unlike nearby protected areas, this is designated wilderness. No roads cross it. Trails are steep, irregular, and intentionally unmanaged. Linville reveals a version of Appalachia stripped of adaptation. No farms, no towns, no infrastructure smoothing the edges. And as the mountains continue north, that severity begins to transform, rising into higher summits and longer corridors, where endurance takes a different form and one peak quietly dominates the horizon. Mount Mitchell rises to 2,037 meters, about 6,684 feet, making it the highest point east of the Mississippi River. That elevation places it outside the typical Appalachian environment. Temperatures here are consistently lower, winds are stronger, and winter conditions last weeks longer than in surrounding valleys. The forest near the summit shifts into a spruce fir ecosystem more commonly associated with southern Canada than the southeastern United States. The mountain also influenced early scientific study. In the 19th century, Elisha Mitchell measured the peak to prove it was the tallest in the region, a claim that ultimately cost him his life during a later expedition. His work helped establish early American geological surveying in the East. From the summit, ridgelines stretch in every direction, revealing the long, folded structure of the range. That structure doesn't end here. North of this peak, the mountains stop rising upward and begin stretching forward, forming a corridor where movement becomes more important than height. The Appalachian Trail is a continuous footpath running approximately 3,500 kilometers, about 2,190 miles, along the eastern United States. Rather than cutting across terrain, the trail follows the natural structure of the mountains. It stays on ridgelines, passes through gaps, and avoids valleys where flooding and development are more likely. Many sections trace routes used for thousands of years, first by migrating animals, then by indigenous peoples, and later by settlers moving inland. This alignment makes the trail physically demanding, but geographically logical. Elevation gain is constant. Long, gradual climbs replace short, steep ascents. Movement becomes steady rather than fast, dictated by slope and endurance instead of distance. Ecologically, the trail functions as a corridor. It connects fragmented forests and allows plants and animals to shift gradually as climate conditions change. In a developed region, this uninterrupted passage has become unintentionally important for long-term biodiversity. Human use varies widely. Some attempt to walk the entire length in one season. Most return to the same sections year after year. What unites them is exposure to the same constraints, limited access, reliance on shelters, and the need to carry everything required for survival. As the trail continues north, it enters regions where rivers begin to cut across the mountains, reshaping movement in a very different way. The new River Gorge formed as an ancient river maintained its course while the Appalachian Mountains slowly rose around it. Despite its name, the New River is among the oldest rivers in North America. Over millions of years, it carved a canyon more than 300 meters deep, nearly 1,000 feet, slicing directly through resistant rock layers that redirected other waterways. This created one of the few natural passages across the Central Appalachians. Long before modern roads, the gorge allowed movement of people, materials, and later industrial transport. Rail lines followed the river. Coal and timber moved downstream. Towns formed where geography allowed access. The landscape also imposed limits. Steep walls restricted settlement. Flooding shaped infrastructure. When extractive industries declined, many communities were left without alternatives, forcing a transition toward conservation and recreation. Today, the gorge reflects that shift. The massive bridge spanning the canyon connects terrain once separated by hours of travel. Cliffs support rare plant species adapted to thin soils and constant exposure. The river continues carving, though at a pace barely noticeable within a human lifetime. Beyond this corridor, the mountains become wetter and more densely forested, entering a stretch where water defines nearly every aspect of the landscape. Monongahela National Forest covers more than 370,000 hectares, roughly 920,000 acres, in the central Appalachians of West Virginia. This landscape is defined by water and elevation rather than peaks. High plateaus collect moisture, feeding an unusually dense network of rivers, streams, and wetlands. Annual rainfall is among the highest in the region, and cloud cover is frequent, keeping temperatures lower and forests consistently damp. These conditions support hardwood forests, dominated by maple, beech, and birch, along with isolated stands of red spruce left over from colder climatic periods. Much of this forest was heavily logged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. What exists today is largely second-growth woodland, shaped by recovery rather than preservation. That recovery changed how the land functions. Regrown forests stabilized soils, slowed erosion, and rebuilt watersheds that supply communities far beyond the forest's boundaries. Rivers originating here eventually reach the Ohio and Mississippi systems. Human presence remains limited. Small roads, dispersed campsites, and seasonal access define movement. As water gathers and accelerates downslope, it begins to concentrate, carving deeper channels where gravity takes over and a single drop becomes impossible to ignore. Blackwater Falls drops approximately 19 meters, about 62 feet, into a narrow gorge carved by persistent flow rather than sudden force. The river appears dark because of tannins released from decaying vegetation upstream. This acidity limits some forms of life while favoring others, creating a specialized aquatic system uncommon elsewhere in the Appalachians. The surrounding canyon amplifies moisture and shade. Mosses, ferns, and cold-adapted plants dominate the slopes. Winter ice forms early here and lingers long after nearby valleys thaw, reinforcing the area's cooler microclimate. Historically, the falls marked both opportunity and limitation. Water power attracted early industry, but steep terrain restricted expansion. When extraction declined, the region shifted toward protection rather than production. That same elevation-driven contrast continues nearby, but instead of focusing water into channels, it traps it on open ground, creating a landscape defined less by flow and more by exposure. Dolly Sods is a high-elevation plateau sitting between 1,200 and 1,400 meters, roughly 4,000 to 4,600 feet above sea level. Unlike surrounding forests, this area is open, windswept, and unusually flat. Thin soils, persistent wind, and harsh winters prevent large trees from establishing consistently. The result is a mix of heath barrens, stunted spruce, bogs, and open grassland, a landscape more similar to northern Canada than Appalachia. During the last ice age, species adapted to cold spread across this region. Human history here is brief and disruptive. Logging and military training damage soils, slowing natural recovery. Even decades later, regeneration remains uneven. From here, the mountains continue north, becoming broader and more settled, entering a stretch where isolation gives way to long valleys and sustained human presence. Shenandoah National Park stretches along the crest of the Blue Ridge Mountains for more than 160 kilometers, about 105 miles. Rather than dramatic peaks, this park is defined by continuity. A long ridgeline runs parallel to the Piedmont below, creating a clear boundary between lowland settlement and upland forest. Elevation differences are modest by Appalachian standards, but consistent enough to influence climate, vegetation, and movement. The park's forests are largely second growth. Extensive logging and farming occurred here before the park was established in the 1930s. Over time, abandoned fields returned to woodland, producing a relatively uniform forest structure dominated by oak, hickory, and maple. This regrowth stabilized slopes and reduced erosion into the valleys below. Skyline Drive follows the ridge, offering repeated access points to the interior. Short trails descend toward waterfalls and hollows, revealing how quickly conditions change with elevation and exposure. Wildlife corridors remain intact along the spine, allowing species to move north and south with minimal disruption. Historically, the park displaced dozens of rural communities. Homes were removed, but stone walls, orchards, and cemeteries remain scattered through the woods. As the mountains continue westward, ridgelines begin to fracture, opening space for water to cut deeper, faster paths through softer terrain. Hocking Hills lies outside the main Appalachian chain, shaped less by uplift and more by erosion. Here, water carved a network of recess caves, narrow gorges, and waterfalls into soft sandstone. Unlike the folded mountains to the east, this terrain was never heavily compressed. Instead, gradual downcutting created steep walls and enclosed corridors within otherwise gentle hills. The result is a concentration of features within a small area. Short distances separate cliffs, rock shelters, and shaded ravines. Moisture lingers in these narrow spaces, creating cooler microclimates that support ferns, mosses, and species uncommon in surrounding farmland. These natural shelters attracted human use for thousands of years. Indigenous groups used the caves seasonally. Later settlers built mills along streams, relying on consistent flow and natural protection. When industry declined, the area transitioned toward preservation rather than redevelopment. Access is relatively easy, but movement inside the gorges is constrained. Trails funnel visitors through narrow passages, reinforcing how water dictates direction and pace. Beyond these eroded corridors, the landscape begins to rise again, broadening into uplands where ridges return and valleys stretch longer, shaping settlement on a much larger scale. The Laurel Highlands form a plateau-like region in southwestern Pennsylvania, sitting higher than surrounding lowlands without sharp mountain peaks. Elevation here averages between 600 and 900 meters, roughly 2,000 to 3,000 feet, creating cooler temperatures and heavier snowfall than nearby cities. The terrain is defined by long ridges separated by broad valleys, allowing both isolation and connectivity. This structure supported early agriculture, timber harvesting, and later coal mining. Unlike narrower Appalachian valleys, the land here offered space for towns, rail lines, and seasonal movement. Rivers such as the Yophiogueny cut through the plateau, creating deep gorges that now support recreation and conservation. As the mountains continue north, ridges tighten once more, valleys narrow, and elevation begins to rise, leading into a colder, rockier stretch where terrain once again dictates survival over comfort. Jim Thorpe developed at a narrow bend of the Lehigh River, where steep valley walls limited expansion. The town sits in a constricted corridor carved by water, not uplift. That geography made it a natural choke point for transport. In the 19th century, canals and later railroads converged here, moving coal from the interior toward eastern cities. Industry shaped the town's scale, density, and architecture, producing compact streets and vertically stacked neighborhoods. Unlike many extraction towns, Jim Thorpe retained its physical structure after industry declined. Stone buildings, rail infrastructure, and civic halls remained usable rather than abandoned. That continuity allowed the town to shift toward tourism without rebuilding itself from scratch. The surrounding slopes rise quickly, restricting outward growth and preserving a strong boundary between settlement and forest. As the Appalachian system continues north, valleys narrow further, bedrock hardens, and the mountains begin to take on a colder, more angular character. Franconia Notch is a mountain pass cut between two of New England's highest peaks. Here, the Appalachian Range becomes more compact and structurally rigid. Elevation rises faster, slopes steepen, and exposed rock replaces rounded forested ridges. The notch itself formed as glaciers deepened a natural weakness in the bedrock, carving a corridor that now funnels wind, water, and movement. This passage has long dictated travel. Indigenous routes, early wagon roads, rail lines, and modern highways all followed the same narrow opening. Climatic conditions shift noticeably. Winters are longer, snowfall increases. Alpine and subalpine environments appear at lower elevations than farther south. Forests thin, and species composition changes accordingly. Beyond this pass, the mountains begin to break apart, lowering, spreading, and eventually giving way to ocean-influenced terrain, where land and water interact directly. Acadia National Park sits where the Appalachian Mountains reach the Atlantic Ocean. Rather than ending abruptly, the range dissolves into a series of granite hills, islands, and headlands shaped by glaciation and tidal forces. Elevation here is modest, but exposure is constant. Wind, salt, and temperature fluctuations place stress on both vegetation and infrastructure. The bedrock is among the oldest in the eastern United States, repeatedly scoured by ice during multiple glacial periods. As glaciers retreated, they left behind rounded summits, thin soils, and a fractured coastline. Forests grew back slowly, favoring hardy species adapted to poor drainage and high winds. Human settlement followed natural harbors rather than valleys. Fishing, shipbuilding, and later tourism defined land use. Trails and carriage roads were designed to minimize erosion while maintaining access, reflecting a long-standing balance between preservation and use. Acadia represents the final transformation of Appalachia. Height gives way to exposure. Isolation gives way to openness. The forces shaping the land are no longer internal, but external, driven by tides, storms, and seasonal light. Here, the mountain system doesn't disappear. It changes form and meets the sea. Appalachia isn't defined by a single place. It's defined by continuity. The same forces repeat from south to north: age, erosion, water, and restraint. Mountains rise, soften, fracture, and eventually dissolve. But the pattern never breaks. The land sets limits. People adapt to them. Seen this way, Appalachia isn't remote or forgotten. It's deliberate. And once you recognize that structure, the region stops feeling like a collection of stops on a map and starts feeling like one long, connected story shaped over hundreds of millions of years.